Hello, my name is Jonathan Hyam, and I'm the curator of music and recorded sound here at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, located at Lincoln Center. Welcome to Remote Links, a series of videos exploring the life and legacy of composer and artist Maryanne Amacher. The New York Public Library is proud to be home to Maryanne's archive, where it will be available to the public for years to come, free and open access. I'd like to introduce you today to Remote Links as a series that will be hosted by Bill Dietz and Amy Cimini, editors of Maryanne Amacher's selected writings and interviews. I'm thankful to Bill and Amy, Blank Forms, the publisher, as well as the Serralves Foundation, whom we partnered with on this series. Thank you and enjoy.
Hello and welcome everyone. Our guest today is Marina Rosenfeld. Rosenfeld is a composer and artist based in Brooklyn, New York. Her works explore acoustic architectures and experimental forms of participation and sociality in sound installation, music performance, and more recently, sculpture and image making with attention to perception and the female body. In the late 90s, she began a lifelong practice of creating original dub plates, developing an improvisational practice as a turntablist with a distinctive palette of sounds drawn from her studio practice. From 2008, she turned her attention increasingly to the staging and diffusion of the voice within dynamic systems of amplification. Rosenfeld's work has been presented by the Park Avenue Armory, the Museum of Modern Art, the Kitchen, the Whitney and Guggenheim Museums, the Fondacion Serralves, and festivals and biennials throughout Europe, the US, Canada, and Australia. She has mounted solo exhibitions in recent years at Portikus Frankfurt, the Artist Institute in New York, and in May 2021 at Kunsthaus Basel. Her most recent project, the multi-part Deathstar, was recently released in 2020 on Shelter Press. Rosenfeld teaches in the MFA programs of Bard College and Brooklyn College and is currently a research artist with experiments in arts and technology at Bell Labs Nokia.
Thanks, Amy. I just want to add a tiny bit to that. When putting this series together, Amy and I were excited by the prospect of a new readership that would be made possible by the publication of Amacher's selected writings, the book. But in this sense, our guest today is a bit of an exception, as Marina Rosenfeld is actually our only guest that I believe knew and worked closely with Amacher. I first met Marina when Maryanne died. At that point in 2009, Marina Rosenfeld had worked for many, many years already with Maryanne Amacher at Bard College in the summer MFA program. And Marina organized a memorial for Amacher there. And for that, I offered a selection from Maryanne's 2005 piece, Glia, sort of a very exceptional late electroacoustic piece. But though Marina and Maryanne worked closely together as teachers, I'm not actually sure how much of Rosenfeld's work Amacher was able to experience live. Had she had the opportunity, she might have been struck with the rare recognition of someone else embodying and occupying the position of the composer as radically and authentically as she. And it's in this sense then of a kind of resonant encounter, whether virtual, real, or posthumous, that I'm very happy to welcome Marina Rosenfeld.
Thank you so much, Bill and Amy. I'm very honored to participate in this. I have chosen a wonderful two-page passage from the book titled Dynamic Range, the Head Stretch. I will try to read it faithfully, including the many footnoted and parenthetical elements, although I'm going to leave some of the parenthetical things out because there's so many and there are references to many other works. And I will also endeavor in enthusiasm and emphasis to somehow signify words that are in all caps, there are also many, if that's possible. Note number one, some incredible features of the digital discs dynamic range, time, nonlinear access to sound and image with radical implications to thought and experience. Dynamic range, the head stretch. Most of the music now circulating in the world, really all that most of us experience from recordings, has a dynamic range in sound intensity of barely 40 dB, capacity of the cartridge record. I think of this sound-music environment surrounding us much of the time as the great mid-range mind we've been living in, or like living in a basement cell with constant artificial illumination and never being able to experience the many changing degrees of light that our eyes, minds, bodies enjoy recognizing. Consider what a deprived situation this is. Biologically endowed with a far more sophisticated range of sensitivities, we seldom have opportunity to consciously experience these responsive energies, and really never with reproduced music. And in a footnote, or a side note, being mainly exposed to reproduced music of such crudely limited dimensions, it's somewhat of a miracle that mind continues to register, grasping unconsciously more subtle subliminal recognitions. With so many of the same sensitivities repeatedly being triggered, the same old neural massages, few real exercises or unexpected curious roots, I would think N cells responding intelligence would be dull, insensitive, outworn. Imagine the head stretch once occasions exist for bypassing such a limited responsive range. The new energy created in activating many previously dormant cells, learning now to respond, recognizing consciously, discovering caverns, islands, new curves in aliveness. Resuming the text. Up to now, there have been no media of sound reproduction with enough sensitivity to mirror the range and subtlety of our perceptions. Works are conceived and designed for the limited sensitivity of the cartridge record, not mind's capacity. Finally, such media exist, which can match the sensitive range of our responsive energies. The digital laser disc has a dynamic range of 85 to 120 decibels in intensity. Consider what a head stretch this range and intensity can create. The most subliminal of felt sounds to the most intensely powerful can now be reproduced. This is one reason it is now possible to reproduce my works. The implications of this expanded range and sound intensity are extraordinary. I would like to describe this in great detail, but for now, I'll just make a few suggestions so that you can imagine further. As new work begins to acknowledge the disc's expanded dynamic range, we will have the opportunity to respond with a full range of sensitivities, experience the kind of sound dimension we've previously had access to in life, usually on a somewhat subliminal level, but not in music. More important, we will experience sound dimension not only as in life, but on a really conscious level, because such new perceptual possibilities will become structural parameters for those creating works. Artists will begin to develop these perceptual modes consciously as parameters in their works in mapping structures they compose. Degrees of sensitivity never before detectable, for example, objectified through a music or sound work, can become part of a work's language. And here there are two side notes. Mid-range mind sensitivity may not persist as dominant mentality for long. Quite specifically, just as most current musical thought is based on the limited capacity of the cartridge record, artists will soon base thought and design on the digital disc's potentially expanded sensitivity. As more conscious experience of such intensified sound dimensions gradually affects the creation of music and sound works of all kinds, I think we will experience a strong new energy because we are releasing what has been suppressed for so long by subliminal perceptions. For the listener, such enhanced recognition of sensitivities may help in growing some new arms in consciously claiming the energy of recognizing sensitivities that mind is endowed with, but does not acknowledge. In the last year, I presented a work, Spotlight the Missing Fundamental, It Grows an Arm, for the first time in Rome. Recently, I was surprised to discover correspondences to the futurists' aims, making residual images visible, converting their own interior energies into images. Marinetti's anticipation of a future when, quote, it will be possible for man to exteriorize his will so that it extends out of us like a vast, invisible arm. The text continues. Some examples with this range of sound intensity, we might experience Some examples with this range of sound intensity, we might experience sound dimension as though blocks away or very near, moving beside, outside and around, one ear only, or feel melodies as they in fact do originate and developed quite specifically inside, within our ears, move our head, then want to raise a hand to touch or rub away the melody circling our nose. Remember, I played you early sketches of this work. That's a reference to Head Dance for TV and to Trisha Brown. Do we perceive the sound in the room in our heads a great distance away, or do we experience all three dimensions clearly at the same time? Is the sound barely audible? Seeming to touch skin receptors only, the cochlea seems to feel untouched. Is the sound we perceive just enough stimuli to trigger patterns and melodies created within neural sensitivities, shaping our deepest responses? In the room, does the sound drift, float, fall like rain? Does it make such a clear shape in the air that we seem to see it in front of our eyes? Is there no sound, no music in the room at all, but we continue to hear sound as our minds process after sound from music perceived minutes ago? Is the apparent sound volume larger than life? For example, is it as powerful as a gigantic sounding house? Energy circulating through many rooms and floors. Some people say they feel their bodies grow out, expand with this sound. These descriptions refer to actual results, real effects of music I've made, not simply metaphors for possible experiences. However, there has been no way to reproduce these experiences other than in the performance installation situation. That is the conclusion of the passage. There's so much that one might comment on in here. To begin with, the kind of extraordinary promise that the digital cutting edge of the time at this time represented for Maryanne, and the highlighting of simply the question of volume or amplitude and the limited range on the vinyl record versus what seemed like it would become a kind of standard in the digital format of the disc. I find that so interesting. Of course, we know from the nature of our recording conventions today that the digital range is absolutely not taken advantage of, as Maryanne hoped it would be. But the emphasis on thinking simply about like volume alone as an aesthetic register that is essentially unexplored is just a perfectly beautiful example of the extraordinary way she had of being in sound and being in the world. I'm also struck by the speculative nature of these ideas. Although they're cited around a list of different works, many of those works are not works that were extensively presented or are possible for us to listen to now. And they seem to exist in a register much like the body in Maryanne's work to me, which is a kind of in a zone of a kind of zone of inversion where the mysteries of the interior, of what we are accustomed to thinking of as interiority or like internalized experience, are externalized, like Marinetti's fantastic arm in that side note. And we kind of dissolve some of the boundary, I think, in thinking this way between ourselves and like that which we are engaged with perceptually outside of our bodies. I think those, I guess I wanted to just also say that this passage appeals to me because I actually met Maryanne before teaching together at Bard all the way back in 2002 at the Whitney Museum. We were part of a special room in the 2002 Whitney Biennial where 5 artists were invited to make sound installations in surround sound 5.1, which was exciting at that time as a surround environment that was becoming standardized. And Maryanne's music was at an amplitude in this shared space that was so extraordinary. I had definitely never, I had never heard anything quite like it. And I think it was actually so astonishing that I, to a certain extent, I felt at the time I lost the ability to hear my work. The aftersound that these works were on a rotation, and the aftersound of Maryanne's work was so intense. It absolutely left, it imprinted the environment long after her piece was not in rotation, or long into the next element, the next pieces in the rotation. And it really also really skewed the dynamic range that were, in fact, as she writes about here, much more reduced than what she was doing. So that was a really extraordinary introduction to her.
Thank you so much, Rita. That's wonderful. That's really fascinating with Whitney.
Very, very welcome.
Thank you so much, Marina.